The Still Spinning podcast is sponsored by Athletic Truth Group, a sports training gym in Clearwater, Florida that specializes in pound-for-pound strength through the deepest possible ranges of motion in order to bulletproof the joints while transforming athleticism and elasticity. The owner, Ben Patrick, claims that his new system of training is far superior for athletes than any other traditional programs out there, since they stem from powerlifting and bodybuilding and do not come close to covering the intricacies of the human body in relation to athleticism. Ben would love for you to check out his YouTube channel, Athletic Truth Group, where he's giving away all his secrets in daily YouTube videos, which are designed to give you real solutions that you can immediately apply to your training. What is good? Welcome to the Still Spinning Podcast, episode 64. Back at it here in my makeshift studio on my side of the planet. If this is your first episode, my name is Steven Selly. I have a YouTube channel. I'm trying to provide the best dunking resource I can, which is right in line with this podcast. But I'm also super into everything life enhancing, lifestyle, brain, nutrition, everything you could think of. Entertainment myself, like not just bring entertainment, because I love to do that as well, but I love to enjoy good TV shows, good books, everything. And today, I actually am recapping a book I read called The World's Fittest Book by Ross Edgley. It was a great book on training, from the foundations of, like the basic foundations of training to the very high level speed, strength, and endurance training. Of course, the speed portion, I'm trying to apply all his principles to jump training. So that's why I had John Evans on to kind of give a little recap of the book and get his thoughts on what I've learned and kind of see what's in line with his training and how he kind of interprets what I've learned from the book. So it was really interesting for me to read that book. I highly recommend it if you want to start learning the more details about training when it comes to your friggin' anaerobic threshold and mother if and what else is there, oxidative system and your muscle tension versus metabolic stress, all that type of stuff. It was very fascinating to read, but also helped me get a clear understanding of training because it was mapped out sequentially in order and went over each phase. It was just very easy to follow, because even for myself, even though I'm hosting a podcast, sometimes audio is not the best way for me to learn something. It's good to have these conversations like this, but an audio book or compared to reading a book helped me understand a little bit more. But anyway, I hope you enjoy this episode. If you want to support your boy, just subscribe to my YouTube, subscribe to the podcast, rate the podcast. I only have a few ratings, so I get to read those. It's fun. I really appreciate those people. And also, you could subscribe to my Patreon for $1 a month. You could buy some Dunk Life gear if you're about that life. And I think that's it. I got a Twitch. I haven't been on Twitch in a while, but whatever you want to do, all the links are below. I hope you guys enjoy, and let me know what you think. And I have more guests coming soon and more solo rants about the universe, everything under the sun. We're still spinning everything under the sun and beyond is what I meant to say. And that's it. Toodaloo, enjoy, and thank you, Johnny Evans.
Hey, yo, I'm easily fascinated. I'm feeling so creative. It's your boy Stevie. I'm a planet Earth native. I'm enjoying all the moments because it's such a thrill living. And I'm not sure if you notice. Listen up.
All right, pretty sure we're live, so that's how we start. Right into it. Hi, John.
What's up, Steven?
What's going on, man? All right, so no, I'm going to do an intro before this, but blah, blah, blah. I think through it. All right. So I read this book. I've mentioned it a bunch of times on my vlog, and I wanted to get your opinion on it because you're my go-to expert on jumping and training. And, I wanted to see what your thoughts are, and I have a lot of questions, basically like the timing of these things. It's all about, I'm going to try to keep it really organized for this podcast. It's about strength, different ways to build that strength, but already going off the organization, but basically strength, speed, and endurance. Those three things. And I don't know how much you know about endurance, but it was really interesting in the book how it, like, the endurance played a factor in getting stronger and faster. So that was pretty interesting. So let's just get started with the strength. So there was three strengths, and I know this is probably stuff you know, which is why I want to bring it up to you. And it's like, first thing was muscle tension. The second one was metabolic stress, and the third one was muscle damage. And this is also, so this podcast also is for me to get it clear in my head, but also to kind of just explain what I learned from the book while getting my questions answered. If that makes any sense. So friggin' muscle fucking tension. That is basically what it was saying, was basically start doing the movements you want to do to get strong. Squats, deadlifts, those type of things. Get strong. And just basically get started and start lifting heavy when you can. Like slowly build up, just a basic, very basic lift heavy things. And after that, it was saying start doing a little more metabolic stress, basically just adding some more reps. Try to stimulate more hypertrophy, however you say it, and just get your body at a higher work capacity with those new strength. Not with the new strength, but since you got kind of over the first beginner hump of strength training, next thing is increase the work capacity, add more reps, increase your work capacity. So far, so good. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot there. I'm trying to hold on to all of it, but yeah, I mean, that's one way to do it. If you're looking to
one more thing, let me just complete it because then I'll let you go. So then the last one was basically after that. Then it was kind of, what was it? The muscle damage, which was just stimulating muscle growth. So after you do like the basic strength building, adding reps, then it's muscle growth. So that way you have like more potential for even more strength, because the bigger the muscle, the more potential. And that's it. Those are like the 3 strength phases, sort of.
Okay. So this is just if you're talking about increasing strength, like that's your only objective for now.
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ways, there's a lot of mechanisms to increase the weight that you can lift one time, if that's how you're going to measure strength. So if all you're concerned about is how much weight can I move one time at any velocity, and you're measuring that through a squat or a leg press or a deadlift, and that's your measure of maximum strength or the maximum amount of force you can output, then there's a lot of mechanisms that go into that. It kind of seems like he's simplifying a lot of those mechanisms, but he does organize it in a way that is systematic and kind of seems to align with what I would assume as well. Basically, the first cycle kind of seems like it's increasing coordination. So
that's what he talks about, technique and practicing the technique and like getting all your motor movements or whatever, neurological movements grinded in there.
Yeah, so you're trying to groove that pattern, which is basically meaning you're firing agonists, which is a fancy term for the prime mover, the big muscles that are doing the activity. So like if you're squatting, that's going to be your quads, your glutes, basically your triple extensors. So your hips and your knee extensors, your hip extensors, and your plantar flexors. And then basically turning off the antagonist, which is going to be any muscle that is going to oppose that movement. So by doing that, you're essentially just increasing coordination, which is going to let you be more efficient. Your body knows how to recruit the muscles that are ultimately going to help you do whatever activity. So that's like the beginner gains, quote unquote, that to simplify it. But after that, I think you said the next one's add reps to that.
Add reps for metabolic stress to kind of increase the work capacity. Okay.
Yeah. So work capacity is basically just, essentially how much volume of whatever activity can you handle. I'm sure that you'd probably get a little bit of different opinions on how you would, quantify that or how you would define it. But for me, work capacity is how much training can you handle. So in this case, if you're increasing the volume that you're doing, which is the number of reps or the number of lifts you're doing in a session or in a week or in a month, then you're increasing that work capacity. And a higher work capacity means that you can accumulate more training volume totally, which means that you can stress your body more, which means you can adapt more.
Okay. So this obviously sounds pretty basic. I summed it up a ton too. Like he goes into each one a lot more and why and what your goals are. But like I was kind of thinking about it from my personal goals, which are jumping higher. If this was a strength phase, like for example, I was fresh, I just finished jumping really high and I want to now get stronger to jump higher. Would that be the same approach I would take, or how do I know which kind of phase I should go through? And because to me, it seemed like that was a good progression no matter what phase I'm in, to kind of build more strength and size and then get back to like speed training.
So in your case, I probably would not bank on the first block of that 3-block system. Mm-hmm. So he goes basically, I'm going to address coordination, improving coordination. Then I'm going to improve my work capacity and build a little bit of muscle mass. And then I'm going to potentially build some more muscle mass, it seems like, and then I'm going to do just strength work. So I'm going to try to actualize that hypertrophy, because cross-sectional area is what helps you increase strength and maybe touch into more motor unit recruitment, tapping into new levels. So in your case, you've already acquired the skill of whatever lift you want to do. So
is that from this phase, or you're just saying like over my career of
like
okay.
in life, you're going to detrain it a little bit, but if you just did it for like, I would assume a week or two, you're probably going to come right back to getting the coordination pretty quickly. At least the majority of it. So I would say you would be well suited to increase like the cross-sectional area of your muscle or hypertrophy, because
so go for size growth.
Yeah. So there's two ways that you can get that growth. There's basically type 2 fibers and type 1 fibers. And we all know that you can't, there's speculation about hyperplasia, which means the cells divide.
Okay.
But to what we know, you can't make yourself increase the number of fibers that you have. So if I have 100 type 2 fibers and 50 type 1 fibers, that's the number of cells of those fiber types that I have.
Yeah.
It's not that dichotomous, meaning like there's probably some in between in there. But basically, if you were to quantify those two amounts, you can have 100, which means, you're going to have typically more of the type 2 and 50 of these. But what you're able to do, you might not be able to get 150 of these and 20 of these, but you can change the size of those 100 fibers. So you're trying to change the ratio of the type 2 fibers to the type 1 fibers.
Right.
I want the ratio of these to grow, and I want these to stay relatively small, so that I will preferentiate towards the type 2 fibers.
Which are the fast twitch, right?
Yeah. So you're not able to increase the number of them, but you can increase the ratio, or you can shift the ratio to having a higher volume or cross-sectional area of type 2 fibers. So to do that, I can't really go too much into this because I don't know if the study is officially published yet, but there is a way to preferentiate towards those type 2 fibers, mostly involving intent. So being that you want to move the weight as fast as you possibly can.
Like Olympic lifting?
No, it could be anything. Could be deadlift, could be press, could be literally
just
any lift.
Moving it. Just intent. Okay.
You can. Yeah, literally max intent. And then that basically preferentiates the hypertrophy of those type 2 fibers. And basically you increase your power output by changing that ratio. So for you, to answer your question, I would probably put you in a hypertrophy phase where I'm trying to move the weight as hard as I possibly can, or as fast as I possibly can. While that will fatigue you a great deal, if you have the capacity to handle it, or you kind of can pay attention to your recovery, you're going to obviously, assuming you don't get hurt, you're going to change that ratio and have more type 2 volume and then type 1 volume. And then what you're going to do, or cross-sectional area, sorry. And then what you're going to do is you're going to maximize the strength gains by being in those lower rep ranges. So basically less than 5 reps. So for you, like I said, you'd start that 6 to 12 or 6 to 10, I guess, range. Do that, maybe keep most of your training there. And then.
All right. So
we're live.
Yeah. And we're live again. So, okay. So that was what you were describing as me doing like the max intent, trying to lift it, move it fast, and trying to build like cross-sectional area, build a size. That was my strength phase. Even though it's like moving it, trying to move it fast, that's still for me to build strength because I've already have kind of the foundations of absolute strength. Wait, sorry, you cut out for a second. What was that?
I said, are you asking me or telling me?
I'm asking you.
Oh, for you, you probably already have done, to my knowledge, like a pretty good strength phase. Like you've moved heavy weight at a decent volume at the fastest speed that you could, worked your way down in reps and up in weight, and moved the weight as fast as you could as well. So you've already done a good strength block. You've increased, hypothetically, we don't know for sure unless we measured it.
Yeah.
But your training should have been targeted at increasing the size of your muscles, and then you can actualize that size in the form of a strength number or whatever. So yeah, I would say that you probably completed that already.
Okay, cool. So let's move on to the speed one, because I just wanted to get your take on it, because the way the book was really structured, for those that are curious, it was very, very foundational at the beginning, like complete beginner, like just do functional movements like running and walking, and just do those a lot, all different things like swimming and climbing and pushing and pulling, all those different types of things to build an all-around base of like a whole body. And then if you wanted to become like a really strong person, a super fast person, like elite level, this is like the advice he gave. So that was the strength kind of advice he gave to overall strength. That's why I was kind of structured that way, of just kind of build the absolute strength, a little more functional, and then just more growth. But I'm trying to apply this book to jump training because I really like the principles he gave about strength training. It made a lot more sense than, or at least cleared it up for me a little bit, like in order, just sort of like something that like, I didn't know that, like, I knew muscle size was helpful to build more, but I thought of it more of like almost weighing me down a little bit, like too bulky. But as long as it's kind of functional, I guess. Anyway, let's move on to speed. The speed part was pretty on point for what we both know and I've already knew, but I wanted to get your take on it as well, and how I could make a good transition to strength from the strength phase. So I know we've talked about this before, but anyway, before we get into what we know, what the book said was they really liked shock training, aka plyometrics, obviously, but what was really interesting was the resistance training with the bands. And I don't know if you've told me to do that before. I'm sure we've talked about it, but it was like the band training was doing the same movements as the strength is. And to me, like resistance bands, like adding resistance bands to squats sounded like more strength training. But because of the way it adds more force to like the top of the movement, or movements that are usually have easier time moving, it was adding more rate of force development. So that was like still part of his speed training. So I wanted to get your take on that.
Yeah, I don't think that there's anything special about using bands or what's called accommodating resistance. So accommodating resistance just means that as you move through range of motion, with a chain or a band, you're in a stronger position. So, the weight on the bar needs to go up because you're in a stronger position. And it makes sense. It is a pretty complex training stimulus, or like it's a very advanced training stimulus, but it is effective, especially in jumping where you need to create force all the way through the range of motion. I personally don't play around with them that much because I think intent will automatically kind of do that for you. Meaning if you drive the bar up the whole lift, you're able to increase the output or the force that you're applying to the ground to accelerate the bar more at the top of the lift, so the bar kind of bounces off your back or whatever else, but maybe you don't do that or whatever else. And so the accommodating resistance kind of increases your strength in those end ranges of motion. As far as increasing speed, though, I don't know what his thoughts were about that, but when you talk about shock training, it's pretty in line. That term was popularized by a guy named Yuri Verkhoshansky. Some people say
he mentioned him in that one in the book.
Yeah, so recently I've been actually going back and reading a lot of his original forums and a lot of the original texts, revisiting those because I read them probably like 5 years ago. Like Super Training is his big book or archive reference. I don't know what you want to call it. But anyway, so what he basically did was he would do an endurance block. I mean, he had a couple different forms of periodization or planning, but he would basically say, hey, I'm going to do 4 major months of training because it's Russia, it's cold, and I can only do certain things in time of year, and the season is here. So I'm gonna just play around with this block, this training or these cycles or months at a time where I switch emphasis. So the first emphasis is going to be hypertrophy and increasing the muscle size and kind of preparing me. The next one's going to be a focus of strength. The next one's going to be a focus of power in some regard or another. And then the last one's going to be shock training. And he would basically move and have block training just means that you have a heavy emphasis and only about 1 or 2 of them. So he'd say the first one, I'm really going to do 80% of my training basically at this focus. 20% of this other stuff, but 80% of it's going to be these focuses or this focus. And then the next block, I'm going to have this focus. And the next block, I'm going to have this focus. So the shock training and kind of what it seems like this guy is doing is pulling a lot from Yuri Verkhoshansky, who I really like a lot. And I would consider him to be like the forefather of jump training, or at least the guy that made the most sense of it. The biggest issues with a lot of what people say about shock training is that it's super intense. A lot of people don't realize how intense it is because when you're a kid and you do it, you're just like, oh, I'm jumping off of blocks and jumping back up. It's not really that hard. I think as you tend to get a little older and you get hurt or you have whatever issues, you realize how intense it actually is. But it definitely is a super potent training stimulus. And he had guidelines for the number of jumps you had to do, the days per week you had to do it, what other training you were doing with it. Everything was really dialed in, but it was very simplistic, actually. Recently, I went back through and started to kind of create my own program off of the principles that Yuri Verkhoshansky popularized. A lot of the people that elaborated on his work would be like Bondarchuk, most sports scientists today, but Issarin, a guy named Issarin, I think it's Vladimir Issarin, but I don't know his first name. Anyways, they were all these researchers essentially that started to elaborate on a lot of his ideas, and then you came up with the US guys, and now we have training to what it is today. But having gone through all the iterations of that type of training and played around with it and seen a lot of people, I do actually like the original work of Yuri Verkhoshansky. People say a lot of the athletes were on drugs and stuff, but I think that they've dialed down the volumes, and he was able to reconcile a lot of what they were doing and modify volumes appropriately to help people get better. So anyways, long story short, shock training will definitely make you faster. It'll actualize the strength that you developed. Band movements are fine for increasing the strength at the top of the range of motion, but it seems like they're missing a power training block. So that would potentially be the thing that I would say in the book.
Well, yeah, so another reason I wanted to bring all these things up was, to me, after learning all of it, seemed a lot more, there was a lot more specificity to each exercise I was doing. Because me, it was like when I was strength training, it was like, okay, if I increase my numbers in a squat, if I'm doing this rep range and I'm adding weight, I'm definitely getting stronger. But I didn't realize I could be like either building size or building strength or just getting like neurological pathways ingrained in me. So like I didn't realize how just different rep ranges or different weights I was doing that. And same with the speed training, is you want the depth jumps and you want the plyometrics, but I also want to make sure I'm making a good transition. And the resistance band seems like it's a good transition, but also I just really want to make sure I'm getting the right stimulus. Cause like right now I kind of finished my strength phase and I was going to start jumping and things like that, but I feel like I definitely need some kind of intermediate phase or some more of a transition where it's not just straight into plyometrics. I need to still strength train and do like lightweight things, but a certain amount of reps and a certain amount of intensity.
Yeah, and that's definitely true and aligns with a lot of what I would say. Power training is the best way to do that. It seems like this book preferentiates towards block periodization, I'm sorry, which basically means, like I said, you pick one or two focuses traditionally and just focus on those. It tends to be really simplistic and pretty easy to do, but it is effective. Another form of periodization that I do is called, I think it's long conjugate sequence system or something. I don't know exactly what the terminology is, but basically it means you do everything in differing capacities, and you have a focus. So I might do everything all year, but in different focuses or different percentages. So I might do 80% or 60% of my training might be hypertrophy, 40% might be everything else, just so I retain those qualities. The issue with that is that you have so much variety that your body, or the theory is that you have so much variety that the body can't quite adapt to any one stimulus.
Right.
I think that Greg Half, I can't remember exactly. I'd have to double check on that, but he did research on, I don't know if that's the name, but he did research basically on different types of periodization, like block versus conjugate or vertical integration or whatever else, and found that like they were all pretty similar, which I don't know, was interesting to me as a sports scientist. I don't know the logistics of how they all did it. But personally, I'm starting to see a lot of benefits in having a little bit more of an emphasis in a given training cycle. So like I said, like that 80%. And this, I'm always kind of changing and learning new things and stuff like that. And I can do everything. And I'm always gaining experience and learning from those experiences. But yeah, anyways, so I think the whole point of what I was saying is it seems like he's going with block periodization, and to connect the dots between strength work and speed work, you need power. So speed work is a form of power. I don't want you to think that because they're all measurable by power, because that's just basically I think it's work over time. So it's how far and how much weight you move over a given time. For all of those things and weight, you could quantify power. But that said, power training tends to be the link between what's called strength speed, is the link between that heavy weight room and jumping, which is a super fast movement where you're just moving your body weight. So to do that, you could do things like barbell jumps, you could do kettlebell jumps, you could do or light barbell jumps, heavy barbell jumps, kettlebell jumps, power clean, snatch, hang clean, hang power.
He talks about exactly those things, and I think I'm making it come off as block periodization more than he is, because I think what he's doing is explaining each phase, but then he'll do a good job of, I think what the goal is to have these different things, so what you want to work on, but not stop one. Like, I think I'm making it come off as that he's saying, like, do strength, then do speed. But I'm pretty sure he's just kind of saying, like, this is how you build strength, this is how you do speed, and then, because the whole point of the book is to do all of these at once. It's not to be, like, the strongest or the fastest. It's supposed to be, like, for all at once. So...
yeah, so you're doing, and the reason for that is because you don't want to lose what you've already gained by just doing it completely. Yeah, so that's called conjugate periodization, or commonly labeled conjugate periodization. There's a couple other terms for it, and it makes sense. I've done it for years. My mentors are largely influenced by that, and that's what my probably biggest influence is in training. What I will say is it is very intense to do. Depending on how you set it up, it is really hard to logistically set it up. The biggest issues I've found that people run into is that they have too much training, basically. So it's too hard to quantify everything that you need to do, and the volume just gets so high that it's hard to adapt to really anything, and the global fatigue of the body is really high. So it can, don't get me wrong, it works, and I've seen it work extremely well for, someone like decathletes, world-class decathletes who have to be good at everything all year. And it can be a little bit tougher to cycle training and stuff like that. And I've seen it work for high jumpers and long jumpers and things like that. But it is a very, very advanced training system that you have to integrate. You have to apply appropriately and understand how all the variables are related. But in track and field, I mean, they've been just trying to dial that periodization model in for years, because track and field is just a sport of running fast and jumping high. That's a whole sport.
Yeah.
So for years they've been testing this, you know what I mean? And as someone who's trying to dunk, it makes sense because, you're still trying to jump high ultimately.
Yeah. So I think the endurance portion I wanted to bring up is kind of going to help everything come together a little bit. So there was two things that really stood out to me that totally changed my mind on endurance, because as a dunker trying to jump higher, I think endurance, and I think slow twitch, and I think that it's really hard to train endurance, or almost impossible when you're trying to improve your power output, because you're trying to do like slow twitch type of things, trying to long run. So he was basically saying that you can do both. And also the way he trained it was 80-20, like you were trying to talk about, which was like 80% of it is like your low intensity, but 20% is that high intensity, and the high intensity actually can help your endurance. Because I was thinking, I knew sprints would help me like run faster and like also give me like a lung workout. You need a second?
Yeah, I'm just plugging in my truck here.
Okay. So like, obviously I knew if I did sprints often, I'd have a little bit better endurance, but like he was basically saying, if you do all your training, like a marathon runner would do basically 80% of his training is very easy on the body, like you're saying, like not overtraining, like kind of taking it easy on yourself. And then 20% of your training is hard endurance training, where you really push yourself, whether it's like to get faster or even just push yourself to go a little further. But it's not what I thought, which was like, if I wanted to run a marathon, I'd have to like slowly push myself to run further, more and more. But it's really just run a little bit comfortable. And then 20% of my training for like, say, an 8-week program is like really pushing myself. So that was new to me, thinking of endurance in the fact of like you only train it a little bit, because like to me endurance is something that's more just constantly pushing yourself to do more. The same way with like jumping, you kind of like try to jump to do more. But I guess, and I also think I need to incorporate that into my jumping too, is like instead of trying to max jump 3 times a week, maybe 2 days a week do kind of like 50% jumps, and then one of those days do a high intensity full out max jumping. And the last thing I want to do, just to bog everything down, or should I let you go first? I'll let you go first.
I guess, yeah, like I guess like a more pointed question would help me kind of direct my answer. But curious, but keep going.
Yeah. So basically, let me think of a question. So Okay, so this will lead to the question. So the other thing, so that was just new to me, that it was kind of endurance was not going to hurt not going to hurt your power output. Endurance won't hurt your power output, and you can practice it more as like an 80-20. So you're not pushing yourself too crazy. You're just doing like your regular workouts, and only 20% will help you build endurance. Because to me, to build endurance would mean doing it all the time, like really pushing yourself cardiovascularly all the time, and that's contrary to what he said. And the last thing was, what was the other freaking part? Was that when you do endurance training, it actually helps build capillaries in your muscles to grow bigger or just work more efficiently, so you can increase your power output. And I thought that was really fascinating, because it was basically saying the more endurance training you do, the better your muscles can use the oxygen needed for power output. Hence, it could help you explode more or get faster.
Yeah, there's a lot there, but I will try to comment on the pieces
all of it.
So correct me if I'm wrong. Basically, you're saying that he was saying 80% of your training should be power training, 20% should be this endurance training.
Well, I think it was more just all endurance training. Like if you want to increase your endurance, 80% of it should be like below your anaerobic threshold, something like that, and 20% should be above it.
And he's saying that'll increase your aerobic
endurance. Yes.
Yeah. So that kind of comes into another different area, which is like those numbers. I'm pretty sure once again come from Yuri Verkhoshansky, where he says 80% should be specific, 20% should be general, and then that kind of ratio flips as you get closer to competition. So with that said, if you do 80% of your training being below anaerobic threshold, there's a couple reasons why you're going to do that. One, you'll get hurt typically if you try to do all of your training above anaerobic threshold. Two, once again, there's too much variety. So, if you're trying to do 80% of your training, in that or 50% of your training in that aerobic and 50% in the anaerobic, potentially, and or whatever, 25% aerobic, 25% anaerobic, 25% strength, 25% power. The issue is, how can you really adapt to anything, because you're trying to adapt to everything. So you don't really adapt to anything specifically because there's no real overload in one area. So that said, I agree that you definitely have to have like a strong emphasis to get better at it. As far as the increasing the efficiency, power, like I said, is a term that is relative. So it's not just like, if you increase my dog, she's ridiculous. She's got this toy. Yeah. So we cut out there for a second, but endurance, impacting power, basically saying there's more capillaries, so you can get oxygen better to the muscles. And so you're going to be able to do power exercises better. And power is a relative term. Like everything can have a wattage, right? You can have a wattage on a bike. You can have a wattage on an Olympic lift. You can have a wattage on a jump. If you're covering a distance, or if you're doing work over time, then you can have a power output. So that said, depending on what your time interval is, and depending on what how you're quantifying it, you can have a wattage for a given activity. And yes, your efficiency will go up if you have preferential training to a given, mode of activity. You're going to get more efficient, and your power output is going to go up. So if a cyclist does a ton of cycling, their power output will go up, yes, but over an hour. You know what I mean? It's not necessarily in one bout of activity. So I don't think that is a limiting factor in jumping high, is the number of capillaries that you have to a muscle, because we know there are 3 energy systems, and one of those energy systems is aerobic oxidative, that supplies a lot of energy, but not for intense bouts of activity. So I wouldn't necessarily agree with that per se, in the sense of jump training. I don't think it necessarily applies.
If I get strong, then I'm really fast, and I wanted to build endurance, it would probably hurt my jumping, to sum it up.
I mean, if your goal, it would. I would almost. It's called the interference effect.
Because I'm just thinking long term, not to cut you off, but if I'm like playing in basketball games, right, I want my endurance to be high. So how would I be a jumper, and would I just kind of like maintain my vert? Like, are you saying it hurts my jumping and I'll lose my vert, or I won't keep increasing my vert?
There's a lot of like it's maybe a hotly debated topic right now. And there's a lot of potential like disagreement about the topic. With things like CrossFit where guys are clean and jerking over 400 pounds and then running a mile in under 5 minutes, it's obvious that you can hold on to power and, endurance. These athletes are doing it. So we know it is possible in things like the decathlon. You have guys running 420 in the mile or the 1500, and then you have them, high jumping over 7 foot or running 100 in under 10 seconds, which are both two incredible feats of athleticism. So it is possible for sure to be really good at both. And I would say that the majority of people, though, would say if your goal is only to be good at one thing, you can do that endurance training, yeah, and there might be some positive, adaptations to it that help you later on with other types of training. But how are you doing that endurance training? What is it? Is it just running? Is it just jogging? Is it interval training? What is it? Is it extensive bounding? Is it jump circuits? Those are very different things. So, if you're talking about basketball, I would say you're going to train more like a professional soccer player or obviously like a basketball player. But I guess you're going to train more like a decathlete. I would personally direct training in terms of like how I would set it up similar to that. So it gets difficult talking about playing sports though, because your goal is to be better at sport. You know what I mean?
True. So thinking about dunking as a sport, if I wanted to say I got my vertical where I want it, 50 inches, and now I want to increase how many jumps I can do, that's a type of endurance training, right? Would that be something that's even possible? Because you're trying to jump, but then jumping is so intense on your body. Is there a way to kind of increase your jump endurance to be able to jump more?
Yeah.
In a session.
Yeah, and I think I talked about this a little bit at Dunk Camp. And Jason McCoy was a great example of someone that had incredible, I would say, like specific endurance, to jumping. And basically, he could go out and jump 40 plus inches every single day of the week. At the end of the week, and at the end of the week, retest and jump higher, and not get hurt. So the biggest issues with that is the best way to get better at something is to do it more, right? And when you do something more, you're going to increase your specific endurance for that activity. However, the issue comes in is that you'll get hurt. So this is why the Russians were like, hey, we know specific training is the best way to get better at our activity. So if I want to get better at weightlifting, I'll just do more weightlifting, heavy weightlifting. If I want to get better at jumping, I'll just jump high more often. And to do that, I'm just going to take drugs because it lets me do that specific training more. So I'll get better. And that's why you have to periodize training, is because without drugs, you have to train more intelligently so that you don't get hurt and can do a high volume of specific training. Gotcha. So with that said, you can, yes, but it is very, very difficult. When you get that 50-inch vertical, if you're trying, the loads are so high when you have a 50-inch vertical internally on the body that, the limits of what a human can handle, there's a point of not even diminishing returns, but there's a point of like in material science where you're going to break down, right? Like your materials in your body are going to break down, and there's only so fast that you can build those tissues back up biologically, right? Your muscle tissue, your tendon tissue. So can you modify it? Yeah. How much can you modify it? I don't know. What are the limits for that? I think it's hyper individual or hyper specific to the individual. Like Jason can jump 4 days in a row and have a 40 plus inch vertical every day. I can jump maybe twice a week, 15 times, 20 times off one leg. And that's the most I'm ever going to be able to do. That's the most I've worked up to. So it's just so specific to the person. I think you can improve it. Yeah. But you got to train really smart. And even then, like, is there a point to banging on everything? I don't know. I don't know if
it's interesting. I
have
guess to kind of wrap it up, I'll read you the notes I wrote about the different phases he talked about, because they were very, it's a lot better for me to just read it because I can't reiterate it that well. So let me just pull this up for you. I'm going to cover your face a little bit. Let me see, get this out of the way. It'll be on the screen if you're watching the video podcast, but if not, I'll put it in the description. So basically, it's just like overall training, basically force velocity type stuff. And I wanted to just kind of, you probably have nothing to say, but I just wanted to read it just for the viewers as well. So it starts off with maximum strength training. Training in this zone means we train heavy. As we know, maximal strength is the amount of force generated through a specific movement. Examples include squat, bench, and deadlift, 90 to 100% of your 1 rep max. And then he moves on to strength speed training. Training in this zone requires an athlete to move less weight than when training for maximum strength, but move it at a faster velocity. Pretty basic. Examples include Olympic lifts. Then peak power training. Training in this zone, train heavy and fast, delivering peak power output. These exercises produce the greatest amount of force in the least amount of time, and examples include pull variations of clean, snatch, jump squats, medicine ball throws. Then speed strength training. Training in this zone, we train but with weight. We train speed but with weight. The goal is to move faster than we're doing during the strength speed phase. So this is plyometric drills, hurdle jumps, light loaded jump squats, 30 to 80% of your 1 rep max. And lastly, maximal velocity training. We want to move the body, muscles, and joints as fast as possible. Type of training can be very sport specific. Sprinting, running 100 meters, 100% of your maximum speed. Same 100 meters downhill, and therefore assisted. So you almost want to overclock it. So is this pretty much exactly how you would go about something, or?
I mean, I think they're principles that depend on what periodization model you have. If I were to set up training, it would have elements of all of those. So basically, early in the year, if I have, let's say, a track and field athlete, hypothetically, I'll give you a good example of what I would do based on what we've already talked about, right? And what the principles that he's applying, I'll apply them to my hypothetical athlete. Let's say we have Steven Selly 2.0, 3.0, and Steven Selly wants to be a sprinter. Then I just picked a sprinter because we all talk about dunking all the time, and this will be a little bit maybe easier. So your goal is to run the 100-meter dash in under 10 seconds, which is world class. Maybe would never happen for some.
It already happens, but okay, go ahead.
It's already happened. So that said, early in the year, I decide I'm going to use this long conjugate sequence system. So I'm going to preferentiate a good amount of my training towards early on. I'm going to choose to develop my muscle hypertrophy, and I'm going to choose to develop my aerobic endurance. Specific aerobic endurance and work capacity. So those are what I'm going to prefer, because they're all pretty complementary and compatible. They all fit together really nicely. So 3 days a week, I'm going to train those, and then the other 2 to 3 days a week, I'm going to train speed, power, and strength, because they're still major goals of mine. But I'm going to train them in potentially a lower quantity, and even then, they're still going to be somewhat shifted more towards like aerobic work or hypertrophy or whatever else. So maybe they're higher in reps, a little lighter in weight. So my whole block of training has all of those elements. I'm doing Olympic lifting, I'm doing squatting, I'm doing jumping, but maybe my jumping is for time. Maybe my running is for time and not super fast. I'm doing sprinting, but maybe it's like a really short distances and with incomplete rest periods and on a hill. So it's pretty non-specific, and it's all catered towards that goal of improving my aerobic capacity and my endurance and my muscular hypertrophy, right? So those are all lumped together. And then the next block, I decide that I'm going to do max strength, and I'm just going to prefer to really, really hammer home max strength. So 3 days a week, I'm squatting heavy. I'm doing heavy lifts. So now I'm in that strength or strength speed that he was talking about, moving heavy weight as fast as I can. So it's power, but it's still max strength. It's more shifted towards max strength. I'm doing sprints still, but maybe not as high in a high quantity as I will be doing in the future. But it's moving up, and I'm shifting more towards that faster, more explosive work, right? And I'm still doing this aerobic training, but in less of a quantity. Maybe I'm doing 3 days of max strength work and 2 days of this aerobic work now. So I finished that block by that month, all right? And so now I did endurance the first one and hypertrophy, and now this next one I did max strength. And I held on to those aerobic work, and maybe it got a little faster, and I did a little bit of anaerobic speed work or whatever, or anaerobic endurance. And then the next phase, I'm like, you know what? Now my goal is to get just absolute power. I just want to produce as much power as I can using these speed strength activities. So moving a lighter load as fast as I can. I have a lot more sprint volume in this. Maybe I'm sprinting 3 times a week, and I'm moving Olympic lifting, but I'm doing it for max power. So I'm working at that 50 to 60% range. So a lighter load, but as fast as I can. Doing barbell jump squats. I'm, at a lighter load, maybe 30%. Still doing the aerobic training, but it's mostly intervals now, and it's faster, and I'm sprinting more. So I'm just like doing faster, harder sprints. Now I'm doing longer sprints, so I'm getting up to speed. And I'm doing, like I said, 60 to 70% of my training is going to be this speed strength type stuff. So like I said, sprinting and lifting barbells as fast as I can, and I'm still doing strength work, but maybe in a lesser quality. So, you know, my endurance work is faster now. So everything's shifting now towards this max speed, which the next block is, let's say, my max speed, where my goal is to just move my limbs as fast as I possibly can. So now I still do barbell work, you know, in the weight room, but now everything is shifted towards, you know, just moving the weight as fast as I possibly can. And maybe I take out the barbell work and I just do plyometrics and I just sprint maximally, and I keep a little bit of strength work in there just to hold on to it, a little bit of endurance work, a little bit of all these pieces.
Everything's a taper.
Well, it is inherently a little bit of a taper, but because there's so much intense work, the biological stress, the internal stress is so high that the whole year the biological stress is high. It's just the focus shifts, and you can only do so much of that work before you'll get hurt. So you have to do it. So then you do a true taper where you're like, you know what? I'm just going to do like 30% as much. And there's a lot of work by Indigo Mojica about like how you can taper and the best ways to do it. But you've accumulated 4 months of training, right? Of just like getting more and more specific and more and more specific. And you didn't really let anything drop off. But now most of your training is just in this max speed, max velocity work. And you're like, you know what? I'm just going to cut out all the bullshit, cut out everything I don't need, cut off all the fat, and I'm just going to do high quality work. So now I'm just really going to sprint. I'm going to do a lot of block
sport specific, right? Like straight to sport specific.
Yeah. I mean, you've been doing sprinting all year, right? You started this week, you're doing sprinting, hill sprints, and whatever else that we talk about. But now you're only doing this super high speed velocity sprinting. So that's a lot of how I organize training. That's a good example of how you could apply all those principles, do them in a variety of quantities, but do them throughout the entire, you know, training cycle until you have your competitive season. Because now it's been 4 or 5 months. You started in July or August, and now your competitive indoor season is here to go, and you're ready to run under whatever. Let's say it's outdoor. Let's say you start in December. You're ready to run under 10 seconds, or whatever else. So that's how you could do it. Now there's other ways you could do it. You could just do a block of just endurance training and then a block of just strength training.
Yeah,
like,
I definitely don't do well in that. It definitely seems like my body's ready for, especially if I do strength. I think strength, like I think I can always do, like if I did endurance, I'd be okay because I'm still like moving fast and stuff. Are you there?
Second there, can you hear me?
Yeah. So I think I'm okay if I did endurance for any reason. I feel like I'd still hold on to some of my athletic and stuff like that. But the second I do strength and only strength, dude, I blow up and get blocky and so unathletic quick. So that's the hardest part, though, is that like this was great information and helped me clear it up. I know I fucking butchered it the whole way through, but the thing is, what's the hardest part for me is like knowing when to kind of start the transition to the next one, because I'm the type to like think I made gains but I didn't make enough, so then the whole thing is useless. Because if you don't make those strength gains in the beginning or enough, you're not really going to make that much of a benefit from starting to transition to the next. You know what I mean? It's like if I need to build a significant amount of strength first.
Yeah, you're building potential to build upon in the next cycle, which builds potential for the next cycle, which builds potential for the next cycle.
Yeah.
And if you're training that first quality, then you're not really ever going to beat your best. So that's a good point, and that is why you need to understand detraining timelines, which basically means how much strength can I hold on to if I don't touch it at all, right? And that is the basis. There's this long-term delayed training effect, which is like what Daniel Back talks a lot about, and Yuri Verkhoshansky talks about, and basically it's the whole basis of block periodization being effective. Which is, you know, if I only do one thing and I get it exceptionally good, I'll hold on to 95% of that strength work through my next month of training. So one, I'm going to build up my strength for a month because I know I can only hold on to 95 to 98% of it for a month with total cessation not doing it. So my next block is only going to be a month as well. And even then in that month of training, it's still going to be a stimulus that is somewhat like strength. So I might even better hold on to strength. And then the next block is just speed and speed training or whatever else. And that training facilitates the power training, but it's still like another degree of separation away from strength training. So maybe it doesn't hold on to it as well, but we know you hold on to strength training for a month anyways. So you hold on to it 98% of the strength work you developed 2 months ago, you know what I mean, through that speed training phase, while potentially lightening up and, you know, getting lighter and stuff like that. And now most of your training is in that speed work so that you can be better. I think when I look at your training, the biggest issue is that your blocks, your cycles seem to be a little bit too long. you don't really have great transitions between them.
Right.
And you tend to do a little bit of too much of everything at the so you tend to do everything all the time. Like,
yes, I mean it's hard because as soon as I feel like I'm falling off one area, it feels like I'm losing it and that's partly because of my own bad training earlier this year. Is like I did too much of one, and I, like you said, dug myself too much of a hole, and that was horrible. This strength phase, I actually think I did great because I did lessen up the jumps, but I did just enough jumping. I felt like to hold on to it because I did have some bad days. But I just think towards the end, the amount of lifting, gaining weight, which comes with lifting, I was building muscle. I had no problem with that, and I was still jumping okay. But the amount of jumping I was still doing all just damaged my knee so badly, and I didn't stop as soon as that happened. Because the last time my knee hurt, I jumped through it and it got better. But this one, I was just way too big. So that was my only downside. But other than that, I think I did the strength phase correctly. So, but I gotta hold on to it now.
Yeah, and I could talk for days about that tendon.
Oh, for sure. But that's episode 3 of John and Steve.
John and Steve.
All right, man. I'll let you go. I gotta eat too. Anything you want to say? Anything you want to shout out? Any people you want to send love to? Anything in the universe you want to put out there? Any type of things you want to do? Anything you want to look at? Anything you want to recommend? Anything you want to talk about next time? Anything you want to do next time? Anything you want to come back and say?
Yes. There's tons of stuff. There's a couple things. One, I just got everything finalized for my LLC and stuff like that. So I'm excited about that. So
new Instagram, or are you going to change your Instagram? What's it going to be?
I don't know, dude. We don't know
Figure
yet.
that out.
All that. The logistics not figured out yet, but we're translating human performance.
Dude.
A lot, because I think that if you want to jump high, you got to be able to translate your momentum vertically. And that translation also applies to your training because you have to actualize.
Double entendre.
I stole that from Stephen Selly. And I think translating is important because you translate your athleticism or your strength and power into speed and whatever else. So I really like that. And I stole it from Stephen Selly. Shout out Stephen Selly.
Dude, I love it. Oh, yeah, translation day, dude. Forever.
Translation day. But we're going to translate your potential into athleticism. So I really like that. That said, other things I want to throw out there. Shout out to my mentors, who I will always give credit to, and that would be Dan Paff, Mike Young, big influences with Tom Telez and Boo Schexnader, who are track coaches. So check them out if you really, really, really want to get into high level stuff. Especially Mike Young, dude coached me when I was like 17 and set up the snowball, or 16. Set up the snowball that is John Evans today, which is just like, and just has all the information. I shout him out every time, but he's super smart. Daniel Back, Tyler Ray, you guys are great. I love corresponding with you guys. To other guys, the European coaches that I get to talk to all the time, the high jump coaches, also great. Your network is super helpful when you're trying to be a better coach. So putting that out in the universe. The last would be last thing in the universe that I'd like to put out there is just respect and love people.
Yes.
Real. I really think that that's important, because like you said, what you put out, comes back to you, and I just feel like you build good relationships. Relationships are what matter. So that's what I got. That's what that's what.
Dude, I love it. You're making this still spin a little more happy.
Still spinning, baby. Still spinning.
Oh, damn. All right. I guess I'll see you, bro. We'll talk soon. And I guess that's it. Until next time, dude. Thank you for coming on, and we'll have you back soon. Me and Garrison, look.
What up, Garrison?
All right. Toodaloo.
Hey, yo, I'm easily fascinated.